So Joe Biden must have finally gotten the political message. You know, all those polls, one after another, showing how miserably he's doing with the American people in terms of what they think his plans for the economy. That must have eventually caught up with him, because he's now out with a very big, very elaborate op-ed in the Wall Street Journal showing us, apparently, how he's going to tackle inflation. Joe Biden, my plan for fighting inflation. It's like, Joe Biden, my summer vacation. I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh. This is actually serious. And you know what I'm just going to say? I'm happy. I'm happy. Someone in the White House has finally recognized that inflation is more than transitory, as I've been telling you for the last 2 darn years. But this idea would only create more inflation. It's like these people cannot get out of their own darn way. By the way, what really cracks me up is before he gets into how he's going to fight the inflation, he wants you to know the economy's doing great, better than it ever has before. And he takes credit for that, of course. So let me just ask you this. If our economy is doing so darn well, why does everybody feel so miserable? Good to have you here, everyone. Welcome to the Trish Regan Show. Do make sure you are subscribing to the channel and you're hitting the alert button so you know every time we have one of these shows. It would mean a lot to me if you did that. So do subscribe on Rumble or on YouTube, wherever you're getting this video. Also, make sure you go and download the full version of the show on Apple iTunes or on Spotify, on Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts. I want to point out, hey, you want to fight inflation? Portions of today's program are brought to you by Legacy Precious Metals, legacypminvestments.com. There has never been a better time to invest in precious metals like gold, like silver, than right now. So go to legacypminvestments.com for more. And let's turn to this grand old plan that will actually just create more inflation, because for some reason, these politicians, they think the answer to everything is you just hand out more money. You know, you keep them down on the farm by keeping them a little bit happy temporarily, but you don't actually address any of the real issues going on with our economy that will create more problems, not just for our generation, but our kids' generations and their kids' generations. We got ourselves one big old-fashioned mess. And I'll tell you this, I just want to point out, the people get it. People know it. So as much as some on the left, talking heads, want to say, oh, you know, the economy is great. Yeah, we've got really low unemployment. We do, by the way, and I love that. But I would just say, if it's all so great, then why is everybody feeling so bad? Why do we keep getting poll after poll after poll showing us how miserable people are because of all this inflation, right? Higher food, higher energy costs. Heck, we are looking at the highest gas prices we've ever seen in history. And I'll tell you this, oil traded at $115 a barrel. That would be crude oil. I suspect that as we get into the busy summer driving season, that's going to go closer to $130, which means you could be looking at gas prices in some markets of $9 a gallon very, very soon. And you wonder why people feel so bad. Okay, so he's finally admitting this. It's not transitory. Haha. What do you know? Turns out that inflation is not transitory, as I have been insisting for the last 2 straight years. 2 straight years. But you know, they don't want to hear it. Anyway, he's got a plan. He's got a plan, and I just want to walk you through this sort of step by step, effectively debunk some of this, because you need to know what the economic implications of some of the things that are being proposed really are. Bottom line, it would actually, in my view, create more inflation in the economy as opposed to less. And I suspect would actually be very suppressing for a lot of businesses. Anyway, he did point out that, you know, we're doing great. Hey, you know, unemployment is where it is, extremely low, and that's fantastic. I'll give him that. That is great. Of course, you knew it had to be great because it had gone way up. So of course it comes down. That's normally how these things work when the economy reopened. Anyway, he did say that there were more new small business applications in 2021 than in any previous time in history. Okay, that's good too. I'll give him that. I'm all for business creation. But then there's this line, this cracks me up. He's excited about this. This is something that, frankly, like, we shouldn't be that excited about. This is something that should be a given. He said, according to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, the U.S. economy will be larger at the end of the year relative to its pre-pandemic size than any other Group of 7 economy. I'm sorry, like, of course we should be larger, right? Of course we are the United States of America. We are the world's largest economy. I mean, if France were suddenly taking our place, or China, you know, that would be kind of bad. Like, this to me is a given. You are the United States. You are going to be the #1 economy. You better be. I mean, when we're touting that as something to be excited about, I'm sorry, Joe Biden, but you know what? We've always been the #1 economy, at least in the post-World War II era. He goes on and he talks about how he's trying to change things, right? He wants to change sort of the system that he believes have put everyday Americans in a pretty bad spot. Well, I fundamentally disagree with that, because I fundamentally believe that with the right tax policy, lower taxes, with less regulation, I mean, you need enough regulation, of course, and the right trade policies, you actually create a very good environment, as we saw the previous administration do up until COVID, for economic prosperity. In fact, we saw the biggest gains in median incomes, adjusted for inflation, that we had ever seen for everyday folks. So that was, in my view anyway, and you can go back to the 80s, and Ronald Reagan and the success he had with the economy at that time, that is a testament to what can be done, what should be done. Anyway, he's got this transition, right, that's going to happen. Kind of makes me a little nervous, only because we know, remember when he brought all those people, historians and academics, to the White House to discuss how he could really have an impact, and they said, look, if you want to be really impactful, a la FDR, you need to do this, that, and the other. Sort of a remake of our capitalist system which has really stood by us for over 200 years. Anyway, he still has this kind of in his head, and I do think that the Democrat Party has been in some ways corrupted by the likes of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, by Bernie Sanders, and so there's an effort to court the base. It is a huge mistake for Joe Biden. The reason he got elected by so many people in the middle is because he didn't seem like those crazies way out there in left field. People want normalcy. They want a moderate. And yet, he said he ran for president because he was tired of the, quote, so-called trickle-down economy. We now, he says, writes, have a chance to build on a historic recovery with an economy that works for working families. So let me start with this. We all want working families to prosper. We all want everyone who's willing to work hard in this country to have a chance to get ahead. But he's talking about working families within the context of inflation. Right? He said, we want steady growth, we want to bring inflation down, but we want to ease the pain for all these working families in the interim. And that's the kind of stuff that starts to make me, anyway, as a red-blooded American capitalist, a little bit nervous, right? Because now you're talking about how can we ease their pain with inflation? Oh, well, we'll just give them more money and then they can afford the goods and you know, case closed. The problem is that's not how inflation works. When you give out more money by way of government handouts or by way of the Federal Reserve printing money, then you create an inflationary effect. And so he would actually be adding to inflation if the goal was, let's make everybody's life easier so we'll just have these handouts. That's not going to work. Okay, like go around the world. Lots of countries have tried it. And it's always ended in misery and total failure. The other thing he does in this Wall Street Journal op-ed is he does blame the Fed, which I kind of got a kick out of. And he's not entirely wrong. I'll give him that. The Federal Reserve really screwed up, and they are the ones ultimately responsible for inflation. So he's in an unfortunate position in that Jerome Powell did not do what he needed to do to control inflation much earlier on, and I think does risk going down in history if he can't get this thing worked out as a pretty sort of, you know, not bright guy. I say bright, not bright, only because this stuff is so obvious. Like, why would you keep printing money? Come on. Come on, it's not transitory, all right, guys? Anyway, he did also say that his answer to all of it, and this is troubling, the answer to higher prices at the gas pumps, which he blames on, of course, the situation going on overseas, is to have tax incentives for clean energy. So clean energy tax credits and investments. Okay. So I'm just a realist here. I like green energy, okay? Like, I like it, really and truly. I got nothing against it. I've actually written about it as perhaps an interesting sector to be in, especially as we were going into this administration. You know, as you were trying to sort of prepare for the future in your portfolio, I've written about green energy being a promising spot because the administration clearly cares so much about it. But I'm also just a realist, and I know that you're not going to get 300 windmills on the coast of Maine tomorrow, all right? Like, these things take time. And we had plenty of what I call low-hanging fruit out there, like the Keystone Pipeline, that could have been done, and that would have helped. The other thing that helps is sentiment. Look, I've covered markets long enough. I know this. Sentiment matters. So if you go around and say, I'm not going to allow any of this drilling on federal lands, well, what does that do to investors and how they think about the future? Well, they're like, why bother investing in this energy company if the Biden administration isn't going to allow this energy company to actually maximize its profits by having new drilling opportunities? So there's nothing in there about that. He's proud because he said, well, you know, I released the strategic reserves, the most anybody has ever released. That's the gas, basically, that you know, goes in your car. We keep it in what's known as the strategic petroleum reserve. We get all this oil that we stockpile for emergency use. Key word there being emergency. Emergency use. And you're supposed to have it just in case things get really bad, and then you go and you tap the SPR. Don't forget, this same group of politicians, they were out criticizing the Trump administration because Donald Trump said, hey, oil's at 10, 12 bucks a barrel. We should fill up the SPR. We should buy oil because it's trading so low. And they were like, oh, he's just trying to help the energy companies. He's just trying to help big oil. It's a giveaway. It's a friendly thing to do to big oil. No, it's like common sense, right? Like, you want oil in case of emergency. And now apparently that emergency has come. Joe Biden has decided we're just going to release as much as we can. That has helped, maybe on the margin, energy prices, but we're still looking at the highest gas prices we have ever seen. And the height of the summer driving season is just beginning, and we have not even seen the full effects of what all that oil coming offline that would have otherwise come from overseas is really going to mean. He thinks it's going to save you $500 on your utility bills if he does this investment in clean energy. Okay, maybe someday, you know, if I buy a Tesla too, I'll really save on my gas bills. The Tesla's kind of expensive, and there's kind of a really long wait for one right now. You're talking about some of these projects, a really long wait. His other solution, of course, is you just spend more money on infrastructure. See that? There's a theme here. You spend, you spend, you spend, you spend, and that somehow is supposed to make everyone's life better? I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, maybe the infrastructure companies and maybe the clean energy companies that will benefit from all these investments, maybe their lives will be better, but not everyday Americans. Oh, and then the other real winner idea is that he's going to crack down on shipping costs because, you know, those big bad shipping companies, they're probably just gouging everybody. They're making too much money. It's not right that they make money. Look, their costs have gone up too, right? They can't find employees. They're struggling to make sure that they've got gas in their tanks. And there's a whole thing at play, right? This is what you call the domino effect. This is why economic policy matters. This is why it's so important. Anyway, he also wants to lower the cost of childcare. I guess he would do that by giving handouts. Again, inflationary. inflationary and hurting middle Americans most, right? Does every middle American qualify for those handouts, or is it just the lowest rung? Because now they'll get childcare, but the middle class, again, as is the theme in all of these socialist style policies, the middle class feels it the most. The people going to work, paying their bills, trying to save for their kids' future, trying to save for a little retirement, they're the ones that feel it. He's got some very bad ideas in here. The only one I liked was that he is talking about deficit reduction. I'd like to see that happen someday, somehow. That would be awfully nice. But then, no sooner does he say that, he goes right back to the well. You know what? The IRS needs to just tax everybody more. At least billionaires, he says. Well, I'm going to say something. I'm going to tell you this. And this is a really important takeaway. If there's nothing else in this podcast that you remember, I want you to remember the fat cat tax loophole that the Democrats put in place and continue to allow. Continue to allow. You do have billionaires, billionaire investors in what's known as the private equity space that, by the way, back all these big politicians' campaigns. And they don't actually pay income tax on their earnings, which, yes, are their earnings. It's a form of salary that they get. But they classify it differently. They say, oh, well, actually, it's an investment. It's an investment. You know what? I'm sorry, guys. You know, how are you any different than a dentist? A dentist who goes to work every day and receives a fee, right? A salary for his or her work. These private equity bankers, they too get a portion of any of the profits out of the fund plus a fee. Okay, so they get a fee and they get profits on the investment. And all of it is just considered investment. It's really kind of a shame. And every politician has had the ability to change this. I love how he says, you know, you get a tax code that, quote, allows a billionaire to pay lower rates than a teacher or a firefighter. Well, he's right. And you know what? He doesn't need to go to Congress to change this. He really should be working aggressively so hard to change it himself. This is so important. We could fix this. It's a simple fix. He won't do it. Anyway, I as usual, am just nauseated by the ridiculous proposals that are so short-sighted and lacking in any kind of depth or real strategy. This is all they do. So they're okay, more give-outs. You know, we'll lower child care costs, you know, and help parents get back to work. No, that's not actually going to work that way. It's going to drive more inflation, both in terms of the wages for the various child care centers, as well as the wages to incentivize people to go back to work when, you know, they got to take care of their kids and spend that much more money. It's just really irresponsible. These are irresponsible individuals that don't really care about your pocketbook. They care about getting elected. And he knows he's up against it. He knows the American people see through him. And that's the reality of this. Anyway, it's a big, giant blame game. And I'm tired of it. I'm sick of it. And we should move on to happier things, right? We should move on to happier things because we've got a housing market that's still on fire. I'm a little worried about it nonetheless. In fact, if you listened to last week's podcast, I was talking to you about some of the challenges we're now seeing in the housing market, or sort of warning signs, if you would. But, you know, we'll save that for another day and celebrate the good news. I've got great news to tell you about in the housing market, if you own a home, that is. But before I do that, I just want to tell you about AMAC. This is a wonderful organization, one of the sponsors of this program, a great, great group that's standing up for your values and my values, and I think all conservatives' values there in Washington every single day and all over the country. It's a group of people, more than 2 million of us, who have come together to actively make sure that we Americans are being taken care of. There's a sense of duty to preserve our way of life in terms of freedom and the prosperity that Americans have always enjoyed. We want that to continue. You don't want inflation in the economy, in other words. You don't want a redistribution of wealth so that everything you worked your whole life for just doesn't matter. Or, you know, if you're the chump who actually paid for your kid's education and scrimped and saved and worked 3 jobs, and now suddenly Joe Biden's waving a magic wand and just saying, well, none of this matters anymore. You know, we're going to forgive all that debt. This is an organization that's actively working to make sure you are protected. So I want you to look at joining them. amac.us/Regan, REGAN, amac.us/Regan. You can join or renew today. It's just $16 a year, and they got all kinds of great benefits on travel, on restaurants, on airfares, you name it. So you'll make the money back in no time. Go check it out. A really great group, and you can be part of something bigger. You're lending just a little bit of money to help a very, very big cause. All right, so the good news is, I got good news and I got bad news anyway. Housing market. We saw prices jump more than 20% from this time last year. I suppose Joe Biden could put this on his list of good things too, right? It's great news. I love it when I see housing prices go up like that, except when they go up so much that they make you a little bit nervous, right? It typically used to be that housing sort of just kept pace with inflation, which in the old days was like 2 to 3% a year. And if you did better than that, great. If you didn't, well, tough luck. Anyway, we've seen a massive run up in housing prices just over the last year and a half or so, up 20%, again, as I said, from March of 2021. And so that's when you kind of have to say, okay, does this continue? I mean, right now, we're beginning to see higher interest rates for mortgages, right? The 30-year fixed mortgage rate, it was 3.29%, 3.29% in the month of January. This month, or rather by March, I should say, by March, it was 4.67%. So the data is looking at March, 4.67%, and still climbing quite a bit. You know, I would point out that the yield on the 10-year Treasury note is back below 3%, which is good news, right? 2.857%. Good news in that, you know, you don't want those going way, 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 way up, because if they did, then, well, everything's going to get really, really expensive. You already got housing prices up 20%. So if this soft landing is really going to happen, then Jerome Powell doesn't want that rate skyrocketing overnight. But it should, one should expect, start moving a little higher, right? That would be the normal course of action. In fact, you kind of got to wonder what's going on when it's not above 3%. What is the bond market telling us when it's just at 2.857, despite the fact that we're going to have a series of 50 basis point rate hikes? It's telling you something. And I think, you know, there's reason for people to still be worried about this market. I've been saying repeatedly that this bear market isn't over. I do think that there may be some more challenging weeks ahead as all of it shakes out and we get more and more corporate earnings and we discover that people have pulled back in their spending because of those high prices at the gas pumps. So we're not out of the woods yet. I do say, look, dollar cost average is the best possible thing you could do. It's what I do. I go in every single week and then I look for pockets and opportunities when things get really bad and really crazy and you start to see a lot of fear in the marketplace. We're not there right now. And, you know, look, hopefully we're never there. But for those that have cash on the sidelines, those are the times that you want to start being more proactive. Anyway, just a quick reminder to subscribe to this program if you haven't, subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Go check out my website, trishintel.com. You can find me on Locals, my local social channel at trishregan.locals.com. And I look forward to continuing our conversation. I will see you right back here tomorrow.